If you're battling addiction to alcohol or drugs, or you have a loved one who is, you may feel confused, isolated, and ashamed. Today on Still Time for Joy, we'll talk about a nonprofit in New Jersey helping people get back on their feet by offering hope, love, resources, and no judgment. It's a group born out of the unspeakable pain of losing a child to an overdose. Hello, I'm Sandra Levine, host of Still Time for Joy. My guest today is Pam Capaci, Chief Executive Officer of Hope Sheds Light at the New Jersey Shore. Welcome to the show, Pam.
Hi, Sandy. Thanks for having me today.
You are welcome. Now, for anyone listening to this podcast who may be struggling with addiction or have a family member who is, what is the first thing you want to say to them, and what is the first thing you want to tell them to try?
The first thing I would say is you're not alone, and that we recommend you call us. Call our helpline. It's a 24/7 helpline. We are all people who have been right where you are, and we want to help you navigate.
What is that hotline right away? What is the phone number?
Sure. It's 855-850-HOPE.
Okay. Now, addiction is a complex issue. Often families come in crisis. They don't know where to turn. And that's how Hope Sheds Light got started. Talk to me about why this organization was founded.
So we were founded by actually three families, all who lost their sons to drug overdoses. The first founder, Ron Rosetto, lost his son Mark in 2012. And he talks about how he went through this almost 10-year journey of looking for help, not finding the right help, his son in and out of treatment. And when he lost his son, the first thing he wanted to do was try to reach out to other families in his community to help them maybe not have as painful a journey, not as a long traumatic journey that he had. He reached out to his friend Steve Willis, who he knew had a son also struggling with addiction. Unfortunately, Steve's son then did also pass, and they opened Hope Sheds Light with the explicit goal of providing resources and assistance to other families so they wouldn't have to struggle. They pulled in their friend Arvo Prima, who was also a local businessman in the area. They knew his son was struggling as well. And then about a year and a half after Hope opened, Arvo and Bev lost their son, Pav, as well. So is the history, unfortunately, of Hope. However, what they did was, turn that tragedy into something meaningful and that had purpose and was a resource for other families in our community.
And one of the things that your organization did was put together a very comprehensive resource guide about treatment options and many other services that are available in this area. How helpful is that for families who just have no idea what to do?
It's really helpful. I mean, that the origins of Hope, like initially, that's what they thought Hope would be: an online resource guide and a helpline. And what we found out, through sort of doing surveys and speaking with so many families, what would happen is they'd be sitting at home in the middle of the night, 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, privately Googling online, for help and how to find help or what the symptoms are. And there was so much shame and isolation associated with the disease. They were finding unscrupulous practitioners and things online. So when we opened our website, we started to vet those resources. So people found out that they could come to our website and our resource guide and know that we called those places. We checked those places out. We could, with a relative amount of certainty, say, this one's okay, this one's not okay. And it gave people a safe place to come to.
Now, you have a huge walk called the Hope Walk every year on the boardwalk where people come out to support your mission. It's raising funds for your cause. People also write messages of love to their family members who they've lost to addiction. And also some in recovery share their own personal stories. What is the importance of sharing personal stories for others who are struggling?
We're heading into our 13th year. This will be the 12th walk. Back 12 years ago, people didn't share their story. The only thing we heard was the addiction story. nobody talked about the recovery story. And so when Hope went to the boardwalk and all these people were showing up, what we wanted to do was say, look, recovery is real. It's possible. Now it's even not just possible, probable if you take certain steps. So that is the importance. It lowers the stigma. It shows a different face. It puts a different story to the disease instead of just hearing about, the active portion.
So, how do you know when there's a problem? What are some of the signs?
Oh gosh, it depends on. So, for example, if you're looking at a teenager, so many of the signs can mimic what adolescence looks like. There can be rebellion or, changing of a peer group, a lack of interest in things that they normally had an interest in. And so you really have to stay connected with your kids and get a little bit involved in what they're interested in because a lot of it can mimic adolescence. However, if those behavior traits continue into early adulthood and you're seeing some of the first kind of early warning signs might be a lack of interest in going to school, like maybe they don't want to do college or drop out of college, or can't hold a job if college isn't their career pathway, and they're having a recurring issue at work. If they're you know argumentative, confrontational, like withdraw and isolate. These are all things that if you're seeing an extended period of time of those sorts of behaviors, you want to start to think, well, maybe there's a substance that's involved here.
And I know this is a difficult question, but if you had to point to a reason why people start using and why people have problem with alcohol or drugs, does one particular thing stand out to you?
I've been in the field a really long time. And back in the day, when I was a prevention educator in schools, and we used to really believe that if there was a traumatic event, or from a broken home or early childhood dysfunction or abuse, and that was true, and that can still be true. However, with the onset of the opioid epidemic, what we really are also finding is that none of those things can be in place. And you could have had an injury and been prescribed prescription drugs, painkillers. You could have a knee replacement. So now it's a whole different landscape, and I can say that it could be all of those things that I mentioned initially, or none of those things that bring a person to addiction. Lots of life stressors. Um, you know, we've gone through the mortgage crises. We went through all kinds of situations that, you know, over the backdrop of a pharmaceutical industry who was pushing, medication that would take away your pain. And I think that has it's a real factor that we can't ignore anymore.
And of course, the COVID pandemic, I'm sure, caused a
COVID,
lot of problems.
it did. I mean, surprisingly, COVID really, through COVID, what we saw is a huge spike in alcoholism. That extreme isolation, and as I think the liquor store stayed open through all of it. That was one of the only things that people could do, and so you were seeing for the first time alcohol becoming an issue for people who never had an alcohol problem before. And you're looking at mid 20s, 30s. They're all of a sudden they're coming out of COVID and they're going through alcohol withdrawal, which is actually very dangerous medically. So
Sure. Now, I know with all the awareness about the prescription drugs, the opioids, and how that was such a disaster leading to heroin use, it's better now, right, in the medical community with not being so quick to prescribe opioids and not prescribing the amount, or am I wrong about that?
I mean, it's better. It's still not where it could be. If people legitimately have pain issues, I don't want to villainize the need to use opioid painkillers. However, we did pass some laws where, initial prescription can be limited to 5 pills, and then you have to check back with your doctor to see if there's a need for a subsequent prescription. So we have gotten better, but we still can deal with pockets of, pill mills that are still out there, doctors who will overprescribe, doctors who will send people home with 30 or 90 Percocet after a dental appointment. So it's still there, but it has gotten a lot better.
So, the most recent statistics I saw pointed to alcohol and opioids as being the top two reasons people seek treatment. And
Mhm.
I was kind of surprised that the most common age was 35 to 44 years old. Is that still what you're seeing, or what are the latest trends, at least in New Jersey?
So yeah, I mean the data still reflects that. I mean, especially with alcohol, you can it's not as you can drink for a long time before you actually need treatment, um, unless you have an accident or something like that. And with heroin, that process is expedited, so you really can't sustain a heroin addiction for as long as you could alcoholism. However, what we're finding is that it's not just heroin now. There's a whole sort of there's fentanyl, there's fake pills, there's all kinds of multiple poly drug use. So you see it reaching a point of unmanageability in your late 20s, early 30s. And then there's oftentimes these all other attempts to cure your problem before you acquiesce and recognize that you maybe need to go into a much higher level of care and access the inpatient treatment, which is probably the data that you're pulling. It's probably the inpatient.
Yes.
Mhm.
So, what are some of the biggest misconceptions about addiction, and have we made any progress in reducing the stigma?
I'm sort of in an echo chamber, this is my world. And so I do want to believe that we've made a difference in terms of like lowering the stigma. I do think we have. You see more and more the face of recovery. Go back to that term as opposed to the face of addiction. It's pretty common. We've changed. Language is important. You don't hear terms like junkie much anymore. We're people first language, so it's a person in recovery. So I think we've done a really good job at shifting the people's perception. But you could go into pocket communities and still hear like, oh, those people, and it's not the debate can still happen over whether it's actually a disease. And people chose to be this way. So you still have that lingering kind of negative perception about addiction not necessarily being a disease, and that people made a choice, and this, you get what you choose. Um, but I do feel like we're moving past that as a nation, and because so many people, so many communities were targeted, that it really isn't just something that happens. And this is the misconception part of your question. This is not just an urban issue anymore. It never really was just an urban issue, but that whole misconception. It's not just people who maybe were abused as children. It's not just broken homes. Any home in any town across America. Some community, can be affected, some more than others. But that has more to do with access to care than it has to do with, a demographic.
You offer numerous monthly meetings in both Ocean and Monmouth counties, support groups, etc. So, how do support groups help people, and how are your groups for alcohol addiction, for instance, different from AA meetings?
So, support groups are great because the therapy piece of this is a 1 hour a week, contact with somebody, which is very important. But then, it's a chronic disease. So you really want to learn how to manage your life long term. Um, and so that's where connecting with peers and other people who have the same shared lived experience, where you don't feel alone, where you can learn from what maybe some of the strategies they've tried, and they can learn from you, and you just build a new peer group of people who are experiencing the same thing. So it's very, very helpful. You don't feel so alone and isolated, and you learn new ways to live. In terms of it being different than AA, for example, AA is one specific fellowship. They follow the 12 steps. You get a sponsor and you move through the steps, and it's a wonderful fellowship. But it's not the only way to find recovery. So I think what's different about Hope is that we embrace many pathways. You can come to us as a member of AA, but you can also come to us somebody who's not interested in following the 12 steps, but is still interested in finding a way to recovery. So I think that's the biggest difference.
And What is the worst thing that you can say to someone with an addiction problem? And what is the best thing to do to be helpful?
I mean, I think the worst thing that you can say to somebody is that this is your fault, that you caused this, and but just because you chose to start using, and it's kind of shaming. I think that shame language is really bad, and it doesn't serve anybody well. It's hard to say what the best thing is because, again, there's so many different. I think if we knew, like, if you do steps A, B, and C, this will fix you, we would all be doing that. It's so eclectic, basically, and what works for one person and what a certain story is for another person. But I do feel as though just saying that recovery is real, sharing my story, that it can happen for you, and that you're not alone, and that there's no judgment. Like, come in, there's no judgment. Recognize that it's not a linear pathway. It's up and down and circular and not linear. And so remove the guilt and judgment from your shoulders. And, that's really, I think, the best unconditional positive regard, really, is what is the best thing you can do for someone.
Now, more and more research is showing that really no amount of alcohol is considered healthy. The World Health Organization a couple of years ago put out a statement that said so. The CDC talks a lot about how alcohol is linked to cancer, several different kinds of cancer, including breast cancer in women. Do you find people are aware of the health consequences of drinking alcohol, even in small amounts?
Definitely not in small amounts. I don't think that that's a widespread, fact that people understand and believe. I believe that people recognize that if it's extensive use, and by the time, you're really struggling with a full-blown addiction, they recognize then that it's a problem. But leading up to that, I don't think people recognize it. It's very accepted in our society. It's a part of all things, every graduation party, wedding, all the things. Alcohol is prominent, and so I don't think people recognize at all how toxic it is. It's really a poison to every organ in your body, and even in small amounts. I find it hard to get that message out because
People
it's
don't
so,
want to hear
no
that.
one wants to hear that. No one wants to look at themselves,
Yeah.
and it's really, really a difficult task when it comes to. But it's still our number one drug of choice nationally. It's the number one drug of choice. It's the drug that most young people start with at a very young age, and it's still our biggest problem.
And for people who decide they either want to cut down their alcohol consumption or give it up entirely, there's a whole industry now around mocktails. There's something called Sober Curious. Can you talk to me about both of those, mocktails and Sober Curious?
Yeah, I think it could be a combination. I don't. This isn't scientific, but my guess is in part some of that anti-stigma work that we've been doing, and also in part with the whole health like craze that I feel is popular in our country. Everybody's exercising and eating healthy, and we're understanding the impact of unhealthy food. I believe that it's a natural extension to say, wait a minute, alcohol is in that category of saturated fats and sugars, and let's maybe we should be looking at ways to go out and have fun, that and experience like a bar like experience to socialize without the alcohol. And so that's the sober curious piece. And it's gaining some traction in cities. I just read an article that there's a couple of sober bars in some of the metropolitan areas around the country, and it's really getting some traction.
Now, for the founders of Hope Sheds Light, who tragically all three families lost their son to addiction, they're still very much involved in the organization. They attend the Hope Walk. They're very, very, very committed. And do they feel a sense of purpose in doing this work? And is that purpose important to people who are in recovery for that post-traumatic growth?
Yes, so they absolutely have found a purpose here, and it's really finding meaning after a tragedy, and a meaning that gives a legacy to their children that isn't just rooted in addiction. it's something that they're very proud of, and it's a way for them to say, hey, my son's life actually was a pathway for other people to find healing and hope and recovery. So, and that seems to be, a trend in general with people in recovery. The first stage of recovery is really stabilization. It's a medical stabilization. You want to detox all the chemicals out of your system. You need to kind of regain your footing, let the fog clear out. And as you begin to move out of that stabilization phase, you want to find a life. You need to rebuild your life. You don't want to go back to the same people, places, and things. We've heard that slogan before, but what does that look like? Like, where are you going to live? Can you not go back to your job? Can you go back to your family or not? And so all of those hurdles are difficult for people, and what they want to do is find a new purpose and find new meaning. And if they can, I think oftentimes what Hope will do is offer them a pathway, maybe for vocational training, to go live in a sober home where you're with other people who are seeking a similar lifestyle. And what begins to happen is a whole new self starts to emerge, and a new meaning and direction in life has to happen. And when people get that momentum going, that's when we see the long term success in recovery. They can get out of that 1 to 2 year period where they've reestablished themselves. It's then when they start to say, okay, now what impact am I going to have? What's the real meaning and purpose in my life? And we see people reach new goals that are much higher than any goal they had ever set for themselves before the onset of their addiction.
That's wonderful. And Pam, I know you have been CEO of Hope Sheds Light for about 7 years. And how do you feel about your work? And I know in your own family, you've had to deal with some issues. Talk to me a little bit about how this work makes you feel.
I came to Hope. I was drawn to Hope. I had a full blown career in North Jersey, 20 plus years in the field, and I came here to do a favor for a friend and do some consulting work for the three founders to see what direction Hope should go in. And then you come here and you're just taken back by the authenticity and the genuine desire to help other people that all three families have. And so I saw an opportunity to find purpose for myself, and I jumped ship and came here. But what I didn't realize is that I personally was heading straight into this storm, myself. I lost my sister in 2018 to a drug overdose. I got that call that nobody wants to get at 5 o'clock in the morning, and she was prescription drug overdose, and we didn't see it coming, and it was devastating because here I am, in the field for however many years, and I was unable to help my sister, and at the same time, my son was developing a very significant problem with alcohol, and I really missed a lot of the signs. You asked me earlier about the signs, and here I am, like entrenched in the field and a professional, and in my own home, right under my own nose, was a budding alcoholism. And so, being a part of Hope helped me in many ways. It helped me recognize my own need for, I go to Al-Anon, I'm a fellow, I follow that fellowship, my own need to kind of learn more about what it means to be a parent of a young adult struggling with alcohol. And it helped me feel less shame and less isolated. And I started to really embrace what I was saying Hope did for people, because it started to do it for me. And
Wow.
I'm happy to say that through that journey, it was painful and it had its ups and downs. My son is, 3.5 years in recovery, and I'm blessed to be able to say that. But I also recognize that the universe works in funny ways, and I feel like I came to Hope thinking I was coming for them, and really it turned out to be something that was so helpful for me and my family.
Wow, that's wonderful. I'm sorry you went through both of those struggles. I had no idea about your sister. Well, I also just want to wrap up by asking you about the Hope Walk and what it means to you to see that boardwalk just teeming with people who are out there supporting your mission. I've been to the walk more than once. There's just a sea of people, often in yellow T-shirts, marching along, donating money, telling their stories of recovery. The founders are there. What does it mean to you when you see the amount of support the community gives to your group?
Yeah, I mean, it's really a privilege, honestly, to have the title of CEO for Hope Sheds Light. It's not something I take lightly. This is bigger than any one person. Hope is it's an amazing organization that serves so many people. And to be honest, being in the field for as long as I have been, I haven't seen another event in our state that draws that many people. That, people don't come out for addiction, right? But they are coming out for recovery, and they're coming out for hope. And I think that's what makes it so special, that it was the first of its kind. I know there are so many other events now during Recovery Month, but it was the first of its kind. It was the first to really offer hope as opposed to despair. And it means a lot to me. My family comes down. Everybody has teams. A lot of people have teams. My sister's name was Corinne, but we call her Cookie. That was her nickname. And we have Cookie's Monsters that walk every year. And we have plenty of other families that have tributes to their loved ones as well. We have a tree of hope. People put little butterfly stickers on the tree, and they say signs of encouragement for their loved ones who are in recovery, memorials to those we've lost. And then on top of it all, we have about 40 vendors there, all different organizations, all providing resources and services for the people that are joining us on our walk. So it's an awesome opportunity for you to come also figure out, like, what else can I be doing? What other services are out here? Everybody who's providing any kind of service in Ocean or Monmouth County most likely has a vendor table at our walk. It touches my heart. It's the first time I've been in a job where I can literally say, yes, I'm the CEO, but I'm also a person who accesses these services and benefits from these services.
Well, Pam Capaci, thank you so much for everything you're doing to support people who are struggling with addiction and their families. And thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Sandy, thank you. Thank you for thinking of hope. Thank you for having me here today. And if we don't get to see you on the boardwalk, I hope I get to see you shortly thereafter.
If you found today's show helpful, please share the information with someone who needs it, and follow Still Time for Joy for more practical tips on weathering life's storms, as well as inspiring stories of people who have turned their pain into purpose. Please consider supporting the work that goes into producing the show on Patreon. Follow Sandra Levine Productions on Facebook and YouTube, and learn more at sandralevine.com.